Okay, well, thank you again. We're here doing a Phosphine Cinema interview, and I still have no idea how to fucking do these things. So I'm very grateful that I've had great opportunities interviewing a lot of people involved with this Castration movie, and now I'm with Louise Ward, the director
Amazing.
of this heavenly project that I have been obsessed with over the last few months, especially preparing for the screening. Since I don't know how to do interviews at all, I thought it might be a good idea to structure it in a kind of way where you put a castration movie watch list on Letterboxd. I believe around the time you were making part one, and
Yeah,
I've been going through the watch list, and I really appreciate it when directors do that because it helps me understand the work more. And so we'll talk about a few different things, but I'm kind of structured it around talking about some of the movies on there and where their inspirations fall, if that sounds like something you want to
that's so
do.
fun. Yeah, I love that.
Okay.
I didn't even think anyone looked at that list, so that's
Oh, I've
so
I've
exciting.
been looking for sure. Yeah, I like I said, Castration movies, it's a difficult movie to penetrate for me. It's a lot to get into, and especially part two when I first finished it. I was like, I don't know how to feel. This is tough. And immediately, what made me appreciate it more is hearing what people are saying about it and hearing where it's being drawn from.
Yeah, of
And
course.
yeah, no, I know I'm talking a whole lot at the beginning. I have so many questions for you. I'm sorry, but the biggest thing is I saw a tweet, probably one that you had shared, where someone said like, or maybe just a letterboxed review. I don't recall right now, where someone said it makes sense that this is the part that takes place in America, and that totally clicked with me. Of like, oh my God. So where did that choice come down the line on part two in America? As a Canadian filmmaker, why?
I mean, like it's so funny because it was almost more out of practicality than anything else at first, which is I've been wanting to do something with this cult idea for a long time. I have, like some of the shorts that I did in film school have a lot of the elements that became Castration Movie 2, and like scripts that I was working on at that time got molded into it, where Castration Movie is kind of as a whole project like a grab bag of like every idea that's excited me over the last 10 years, and then just
Mm-hmm.
packaging all these sort of aborted projects into this like one mega project. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of knew that this was something that I wanted to take all these elements together, and I knew it would be a very fun departure from what is kind of set up in the first movie and expand the world a lot to say, this movie doesn't like Castration Movie, you might think what it is, but now here's like a total left turn, and now we're in a completely different like environment with this cult that,
Mm-hmm.
is still kind of the same, like obviously still the same universe, the same formal style as the first movie, but now we're like, like the character overlap is happening in surprising ways and all these things that I wanted to uh be subversive. And I mean, the fact that the movies are now released one at a time, uh like as separate, like each of these parts kind of becoming its own thing, as opposed to my original intention of having the whole movie exist as this one mega like film that's like 10 hours long or whatever.
Yeah.
Makes it, kind of an interesting how these now play off of each other as solo works. But to go back to the inception of the America idea, it really came down to me and my co-producer Aoife Clements, who plays Adeline in part one,
Mm-hmm.
has been like my closest story collaborator on this project, like bouncing ideas off of each other and really like um, sort of figuring out what the f full scope of this project is. Like she's my closest confidant in that process.
Mm-hmm.
And we were sort of like talking out on the porch and at our place a year ago, and sort of riffing on the fact that we'd kind of exhausted our resources in terms of like people for roles in Vancouver, where we had
Mm,
uh
mm,
kind of every one of my friends was somehow roped into playing a role in Castration Movie at that point, or were sort of like earmarked for upcoming roles and stuff like that. And
mhm,
Aoife, like almost kind of jokingly at first said like, well, fuck, we know so many people in New York. Wouldn't that be so convenient if you could just shoot it there, right? And that got me thinking, well, shit, what would chapter 3 Polygon Heart Motor look like if it took place in New York instead of the Pacific Northwest? So then I kind of did a full like rethinking of it. And another one of our co-producers, Hazel Norwood, who plays Meredith in
mhm,
Polygon Heart Motor, was with us, and we started kind of breaking ideas for how to, uh, uh, the, you know, move this story from the location where everything else is taking place to New York, and it was great because it also expanded the scale of the project. And I think that in terms of saying that is a project that is that angry, like it's obviously like it's coming from a like that project's coming from a place of a lot of like uh, heightened emotion. It just suddenly made sense, especially after Trump got reelected, that you know, as Canadians, we bear such a trickle-down effect of everything happening politically and economically in the U.S. and
mm,
the way, especially like right-wing ecosystems feed off of each other back and forth. Um, is such an interesting I guess like fascination for me. So being able to then put some of that into this and acknowledge the fact that these are global systems, or at least like North American based systems, within the semblance of this movie, where there's a line that's spoken in the third film, which will be coming out next year, where my character Michaela sort of like in a bit of a cunty way expresses like like your actions here could affect the rights of someone across the continent from you, and it's
yeah,
said in like a very like hostile, mean way, but like
mhm,
there's a unfortunate reality to that with the
yeah,
way like social media proliferates, and so I think that moving to New York for this story and doing this sort of like classic, like Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, or Home Alone 2, Lost in New York approach to a sequel, it also helped with like, making sure that the film's cultural impact got to feel like a grand weight. And of course, it works so great for the movie's hyper online fascinations in terms of its like
mm,
themes, where like I now get to have all of these like great characters played by online like e-celebs and stuff like that, or people who are from like podcast networks and these things that like do exist in terms of like online like 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 digital native celebrity, and then putting that into like an after hours or something type structure where it's like, oh, I'm going through this long night in New York where I'm bumping into like the guys from Chapo Trap House or Ivy Woke, or like these sorts of things, like suddenly
yeah,
becomes not just like a more realistic thing, but also like it's a hyper realism where it's like someone's impression of what New York might be like from like the effect that online cult like New York culture has on online culture.
completely, yeah,
So
mhm,
it just like was one of those things where once Aoife pitched it as an idea, I just like grabbed onto it and was like, yeah, no, this cracks it. This like makes it so much stronger as a statement.
yeah, definitely. So there's so many incredible artists working in that movie, and being able to find like a hub where you can get everyone together in one place is amazing. Um, and there's a lot of discussion with like New York, the idea of New York, like you said, what people imagine New York to be. And with especially including Betsy Brown and your relation to the movie actors and the inspiration with that, was being in New York filming, was that kind of almost like a full circle way of like your involvement with that movie and how Castration Movie plays with it?
Well, the funny thing is like me and Betsy and Peter all met more in like greater film culture, like not that New York like film monoculture or something. Like we
Mm,
met at a screening of that movie in Chicago, and so I didn't really have a relationship to them as like a New York-based thing. It was more so like us, like me, just kind of recognizing that they were working in a similar underground, like fiercely independent framework as I was, where their art was transgressive in a way that almost calls into question their own moral values as like filmmakers. And that was what excited me about working with them. And when we all met up in Chicago, I realized that we all had like a really similar artistic fascination. So I knew I wanted them involved in Castration Movie in some capacity. And we had talked about it back then, which would have been like the spring of, I think, 2023. And then uh, it was uh, great because once we moved to New York, I basically got to go through my Rolodex of friends and just see who was available. And like, when I met with both Peter and Betsy, like just doing like phone calls to like talk about the roles and stuff, like, we were all hyper aware of the fact that there was like a great sort of humor in riffing on what their public presence became because of
mm,
the controversy around actors. So like
yeah.
the humor of casting them both as like trans women characters is just like a very like full circle moment that ties in like the sort of meta narrative of like their reputations culturally, but then also like works so great within the film itself as like their characters that they're playing are like fully realized characters in spite of that. So I
Mm,
really enjoy, like I think that works with basically everyone who appears in these films is like, having an awareness in the casting of what their reputation is outside of the film. If I'm gonna be like casting a friend who's a musician or a podcaster or something, it's like how does your real life in help us interpret who your character is? Because that's something that the audience might be thinking about when they see you pop up on screen. So how do we like riff on that or twist that in a way that makes it interesting?
I love that, and I really appreciate that in the way of embracing that instead of trying to hide the fact that this person already has baggage that the audience is gonna meet them with. Like with
Yeah.
it's when you watch Peter's performance, if you've seen actors, you can't not imagine that this is a possible sequel of just talking about the experience of transitioning and then detransitioning. But
Yeah. Well, and what I think is so important about his character is like when we were talking about who Brody, that character was, it was really important to have that scene kind of form the like real emotional crux of the movie in terms of
mm,
like working as a foil to Circle's feelings, because Circle's obviously having all of this self-doubt around their identity, and a lot of that's tied to their like relationships to community and all of these much more like lofty external pressures that they're undergoing, where it's like this sort of dichotomy between like a very insular community that they're starting to find is turning toxic that would embrace them with their like sort of like chosen gender identity or inherent gender identity, and then the outside world, which is like this sort of like full of these hostile, like almost caricatures of like, these scenes where they're going through all these people who are kind of like trying to reaffirm them as their like biological gender or something. So you have
yeah.
these two like very strong things that are pulling Circle in these different directions. And then you have Brody in the center of that, who's a character who their struggles were fully internal. It was like a
Mm,
self-prescribed, like I felt like I was personally failing at this. It wasn't anything to do with external pressures or community pressures or any of these sorts of things. Their character is someone who just felt they couldn't live up to their ideal that they personally had set for themselves. And I think that that's an important thing because that's, in terms of like uh uh like trying to show all these different sides of it and make sure that the world feels like expansive and is considering all these different perspectives on it. I think it's important, and Peter does such a great job at tapping into that. And I think that their history is having played like that version of themselves in actors, it, like adds an extra level to how we're reading that scene. And I think that that's all like very I like to think these movies have like a lot of layers to everything that's happening, and that we're throwing at the audience on screen, where you kind of can watch it over and over again. You're gonna like kind of unpack the onion more and more, like stripping it down to find even more hidden meaning under it. And
Yeah.
I think that like a scene like that's like a really great example of it.
Yeah, another example of just a character unabashedly acknowledging who is playing them is Liz Purcell's introduction with the spectacle hat, pulling out the blonde death gun with the Solka magazines perfectly in
Yeah.
frame. Just was such a delight to see, especially in a point in the movie where I was like, I'm just barely making it through.
Yeah, well, and that seems so
I need
great and
something to make
funny,
me
and
happy.
that's like all it all comes from like the fun thing about these projects, and I think it's something that Liz has like hit on every time when we were like producing, like since we've started producing these together, was like Liz uh kind of said something to the effect of like the great thing about castration movies is that we get to run with every stupid idea we have. And I
Yeah.
feel like
Mm.
that sequence, especially in terms of how over the top we're going with all of the production design in Liz's like character's place and all of this, where we're, throwing in like the blonde death gun and like all these like other little details that like do add that like extra textuality where it's like, oh my God, like, Liz is bringing so much into it. And also like we're getting to, like include all these like hilarious jokes to then sort of like play off of like all of those elements. And yeah, I
Yeah.
mean it is like as you said, like such a breath of fresh air, because it's like the movie is so oppressive for like the preceding hour of it, then you get this like pure comedy scene right towards the end that really
Yeah, of
opens
course.
it up.
The best use of transvestigating in a movie.
Maybe
Uh,
the only. Has anyone else used that term yet?
yeah, you're
I'm
right.
very
You know what?
curious.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe what was that movie? Lady Ballers or something. They're
Maybe. I mean, what's so funny about it is so much of the language used in Castration Movie are words that should not be spoken aloud. Like they're words that should exist
completely.
only
Yeah.
on the internet. Like
Yes.
it's so funny to hear like people having to then say some of this shit. Like every time we film it, like I half of my sound design work is me cutting out audio of me laughing behind the camera, like like just having to like not being able to contain the absurdity of what I'm hearing, right? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Completely. Another one of those breath of fresh air moments, which I was really happy. I talked with Lex Walton earlier, did a little phone interview, and I had to know, and was able to verify with her that I'm forgetting now the name of the characters in the scene when Circle finally gets out and goes to the apartment, and the friends start sitting down, and I was like, I swear they start playing Sober to Death, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
yes, yes, that was the. So I was very happy to hear I clocked that correctly.
Well, it was one of those things where I think I had heard Agnes play a cover of it on Instagram or something like a year
Okay,
ago or
yeah.
something. And so I thought like fuck, like that's such funny like like transcultural stuff, like especially
Hmm.
very New York focused. Like I think that a lot of the people in like the New York music scene have like a really high opinion of that band.
Hmm.
And so I'm also working like on an art side with like Kate Wirtz and Remy Boydell, who have done work with like Car Seat Headrest before. And so it was
Hmm.
like also one of those things where I knew I could like get away with with having those couple
Yeah.
chords played. So
Yeah.
it kind of worked out perfectly.
Well, to jump into just because I've been so because I've gotten so much out of understanding Castration Movie from watching the watch list that you made on Letterboxd. What and full disclosure, I haven't seen everything on it, but I fully intend to. When you made this watch list, you said you don't know if anyone had looked at it. What was the intention? When was that? Is this like a very serious you? you feel like all these movies relate to Castration Movie,
Yeah, I
or
think that it was mostly just a way for me to kind of like put together films that I felt could be like comps or like comparables to
yeah.
it.
Hmm.
Where if it, you know, because like I like to say when uh when we started making this movie that I didn't really have any films in mind in terms of like I really hate pastiche.
Mm-hmm.
Like at least I don't like pastiche of other movies. I feel like it's one of those things where like the art form begins to diminish when the artists working in it are only riffing on past work in that same art form. Whereas like a lot of the even like the movies I love from like a lot of the new wave movements of the like 60s and 70s, even though they're kind of in a way exercises in elevating genre trappings of like previous movies, they still have these great influences from like pop art and contemporary
Mm.
music and literature and like all these things that just like add so much depth to the work that goes beyond like just the cinema like playing with cinematic form. And like I go back to like a movie like The Substance from last year, which like I just did not really click with because it made me think about other movies I'd rather be watching. Like if you're like
Mm-hmm.
the same thing happens where like in Ari Aster's film Midsommar, which I really love Ari Aster's work, but like one of the bedspreads in the cult is the Shining carpeting. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like now I'm thinking about The Shining, and now I'm comparing your movie to The Shining, and I'm thinking to myself, God, I wish I was at home watching The Shining right now.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, and I had that same feeling with The Substance, or like when it gets into the body horror stuff, I'm like, God, like I'd rather be watching like Tokyo Gore Police
Mm.
or a Frank Henenlotter movie or something. And so with this movie, I really want to try to cut down on the pastiche. And there's a few times it slips in. Like I'm definitely like a David Lynch acolyte, so it's hard not to end up doing something that's like a Lynchism, and when you're staging like a montage scene or something, you kind of maybe fall into the trappings of like filmmakers that you revere. But I think by the time I got to Castration Movie Anthology 2, like all of that's gone. I think that that is fully
Yeah.
its like own thing. So when it comes down to like a list like this, it's a way to kind of think of like what movies do I like and
Mm.
what are like the thing about this list is you could also look at it as these are the films that are just really influential to me in general.
Yeah.
In terms of like these are the types of movies that I aspire towards, that they've left an impression on me. Where when I started building this list, it was mostly just thinking of like what is inspiring to me right now, what are things that I'm like lifting from? And there's a few films on here where I think that it's like really direct, where you can see where maybe like a reference point or something is coming from, where I took a trick from a filmmaker in terms of like the
Mm.
form, or was trying to capture tone and was looking at something and said, okay, well, how did this director capture tone? I'm internalizing that, and then when I get out to shooting, I'm trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that list, I think a lot of it also is thinking about how filmmakers capture emotional beats in a way that feels resonant and carries with you once you leave the cinema. Where a lot of these are movies I've never been able to really full like, even if I forget exactly what happens in a film because I haven't seen it in 10 years, I
Mm.
can
Mm.
look back on a movie like Dogville, for example. I haven't watched Dogville since 2010. So it's been 15 years, but I can
Mm.
think of how that movie made me feel watching it. And then, the impression I have of it now, I am calling back to it through my mind to go like, what is it that sticks out to me? Um, like what little things? Is it a shot? Is it a way someone's face looked in a performance? Is it the structure, like the overall structure of the story? Like, what are these things where it's not even like a specific detail? It's like the impression of some facet of the movie that just that
Yeah.
like I'm trying to recapture on like an emotional level, and that's what
Yeah.
I'm kind of looking towards.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I enjoy hearing that. And for me as a viewer and someone who is trying to understand and like appreciate Castration Movie more, there I don't see, except for times you've talked about, and I know times like Aoife's talked about, oh, I got the fan shot from Twin Peaks, you know.
Yeah,
There's no pastiche I see in your work, but it's these reference points that help me understand. And one of the biggest one for me, and knowing that you're a big fan of his work, that really helped me especially understand part two is Out One and Rivette. And in the way of it is it's so frustrating, but the frustration and the endless conspiracies, the endless not understanding is a part of the process. And more than a narrative or a story, it's also just capturing these creatives in a room and they're all acting out their own situation.
yeah.
So, um, yeah, I don't know if I exactly had a question bringing that up,
Well,
but
no, it's
with
great to bring up
Rivette,
Out One because Out One was a really big one for me to look at. And it's funny because I haven't revisited that film. Like nowadays, there's like HD copies of it available. Like
hmm
I have watched that movie once in my life, which was on in my dorm room, first year university, with my partner at the time, like doing homework in bed while I sat there as rain was coming down outside and was watching like I think it was like a Italian it was like a TV rip from either Greek or Italian TV, and it had both like
yes, yeah,
Italian and Greek burnt in subtitles.
uh-huh,
I remember sitting there just spending a full day watching this movie, and you know it does start to wash over you at a point where I was like I was like I don't even fucking know where we are anymore, like like
uh-huh,
5 hours in or something. And I think that it was it was thinking about how that movie is structured and how I was still locked into watching it, even
mm,
as like it's in some ways left um like the conventions of like what a film is supposed to be doing to keep your attention. I think that Satan Tango like uh operates in a similar way where like in that movie Bellatar has one sequence that's like a 30-minute oneer that's just in a bar and we're just like
yeah, yeah.
watching these characters and it's just a locked off shot and
Mm.
it's like, oh yeah, we can just you can just do that. If the movie's good, people will like if there's some like je ne sais quoi that like makes it work, there's some spark of life to it that the audience will stick with you. And I think it gave me permission to approach Castration Movie almost more instinctual, where it's like, the lived in nature of like especially chapter two in the first part, where we're watching these extended sequences of the band playing, and we're kind of like almost like giving way to a more musical convention of like uh the emotions are getting high, so I'm just gonna let them like kind of belt it out in song in some way. That I don't think I would have felt I could have committed to if it wasn't for the way that like Rivette allows so much of the first third of Out One to be these like theater rehearsals that
Mm,
are
mhm.
kind of there to set the stage on a more thematic and tonal level than they are for like narrative. It's like we get parallelism, but it's like not driving the plot forward. And I think that
Yeah.
that's what was important to me.
hmm Yeah, the comparison with Rivette was so striking for me because it helps me understand Castration Movie not simply being a provocation, and that like, oh, there are these structures in mind, and there is a reason why these provocations are put in this order and in this way. And so, yeah, that's why I've loved like looking at your work from the angles of these different reference points and these kind of inspirations. If I could bring up another thing with Canadian cinema, I feel like recently I've been really interested in just diving into a lot of Canadian cinema, mostly because a big inspiration for me starting my screening series I do here in Arizona and starting this project was the podcast The Important Cinema Club, if you know about them. Justin DeClue is a part of that. He put out Honeycomb on
Hmm.
Blu-ray and Will Sloan as well. And so they've introduced me not to your work, but to other, like I know who Peter Kuplowski is through them and not personally, but know of who he is and the work he's
Yeah.
done. And filmmakers like Terry Chu, Open Doom Crescendo,
Yeah.
if you watched that, and I screened that, and So, I'm curious from your perspective of someone who's worked in the movie industry for a long time, do you see a stark difference between independent cinema in Canada versus in America, the way it's produced or just the environment?
Well, what's really interesting about Canada is I think there's a two-tiered system when it comes to the independent side of things because we have a national funding body for Canadian cult like for we have a lot of different national funding bodies that help to foster Canadian culture. And the
That,
thing, thank you. And the thing about that is we have like Telefilm Canada that is like a big financier for like let's say like Canadian film as you would look at it as like an export entity like what would be seen in the rest of the world. So like they help fund like the Adam McGoyans and the David Cronenbergs and the Sarah Paulis and like that kind of film, right? And that kind of causes like what you call like a homogenizing effect on Canadian culture because once people get in that
yeah.
system, their movies keep getting made. So then you kind of have these like sort of like legacy filmmakers who, you know, like if Adam McGoyan's going to make a new movie, he can likely expect that he'll get some national endowment for it, right?
Mhm.
Um, Whereas in the US, it's a fucking free-for-all. Like I was, you know, like me and Carson Lund, who directed EFIS, were on a panel together at the
Mhm.
Halifax Independent Film Festival, and we were
Mhm.
both kind of out. Me, him, another f filmmaker named Heather Young, who's another Canadian filmmaker. We're all talking about our separate paths. Where like my movie was like 100% independent. Heather's movie had telefilm investment, and then you have Carson from the States, who is like, you know, like he's raising money through private equity. He is working like you know like Chapo Trap House are producers on that movie because they
Mhm.
helped them out. Like there's like all these different levels to it, and I think that that's the difference is because be the US has a million avenues to make an independent film, and the you know the classic is like you know Darren Aronofsky gets to keep making like got to keep making independent films because some big like oil tycoons wanted to get in the arts, you know, and
Mhm.
started a fund where his producers were like, oh hey, we can get some money from these oil tycoons, right? So the investment is like, you know, there's just a lot more money in the US. So I think it creates like an interesting world for indies there. And obviously there's a difference between like independent level stuff and then like the true underground like stuff that like for example like Peter Vack and Betsy Brown are doing, which are like,
Mhm.
you know, almost like fully self-financed or financed through friends and stuff like that. So it's a big difference where the US it's just like all over the place in terms of like where this money's coming from, how it's getting how projects get made. But also like because of Hollywood, there's just like, you know, like a lot more of a cultural imprint and thus like a lot more capital in the film industry, in the independent film
Mhm.
industry in the US.
Mhm.
Which does like, you know, I guess obviously also create a tiered system in the sense of like access becomes very important for people, but it's its whole own thing. Whereas in Canada, you have basically just the two tiers between are you getting telefilm money or are you not? And I'm thankfully gifted in a position where like I have as a producer been able to work with telefilm on projects that have been like slightly higher profile. We have one coming out next year called Riding Shotgun that I'm very excited about.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
I'm very excited for that
oh,
as well.
it's gonna be awesome. And
Yeah.
the thing is like you know, comparing it to Castration Movie, which is like almost entirely crowdfunded. Like we got a little bit of money from a local like provincial like slash state arts organization that has a small portfolio. We got a little bit of money from them. But other than that, it's been self-financed. Like most of the first one was like done with a split of crowdfunding and money I was
Mm.
making working as a production assistant on Netflix shows. Or I think at that time it was like Hulu shows.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I think that you know, I know that filmmakers like uh I won't name names, I guess, but there are filmmakers in Canada who have a who aren't in that tiered system, who have like maybe a resentment where they feel like their career was robbed for not getting the recognition from those like more institutional bodies.
Mm.
Um, like they think that they should be put in that legacy pipeline or like that it should be a system that's like changed in some way and like I think that a lot of work's been done in the past 15 years thanks to filmmakers like Matt Johnson, for example, who has like who did Nirvana the band, the show, the movie, and
Oh, yeah.
Blackberry and stuff. Like
Mm.
he really put pressure on Telefilm like a decade ago to say, hey, you guys gotta be opening this up to like more new filmmakers getting into this pipeline, and they've done absolutely phenomenal work to like really open up the playing field here in Canada. But I think for any filmmakers that are doing work too far outside of the box of what could be that like exportable like Canadian identity type work,
Mm.
maybe would feel a resentment towards that system. But at the same time, like, like this movie Riding Shotgun that I produced, like with the support of Telefilm, is like a totally like outside the box like movie. So like, I think that, you know, it's definitely a system that benefits me. So I think it works great.
Totally.
And I'm hoping that it gives me the opportunity to keep making movies. I mean, I definitely am not having Hollywood calling down, sending me emails, knocking on my door, having made a Castration movie.
Mm.
So thank God the Canadian system is set up in a way where I can hopefully at some level like make projects beyond this one that people seem to like.
Yeah, yeah. When it comes to Canadian films that are in the watch list, one of my absolute faves, which is, I know one you love, Crime Wave, one of the great, 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 great movies.
Yes.
You also have, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, an Indigenous film, Adina Jurat, The Fast Runner, and Hookers on Davy. So those movies being involved in like the way you relate, or at least you including them as Canadian cinema. What did you take from those movies and like
Yeah, yeah.
inspiration?
Like from Ed and Arjua, it's like the way it's shot is like so incredibly beautiful. It's like that very like it's like very sort of like gauzy digital shot up in the Arctic. It's just such a beautiful film. That also like, it's like a almost 3 hour long movie that uses a much more, I guess, it's like in Inuit film, so it's taking a different approach to storytelling.
Mm,
It's more mythic, right? Like it's telling like it's the sort of thing where to me, I think it's a great example of what Canadian cinema can strive towards.
mm,
Where I think that a lot of Canadian film critics would put it as one of the greatest Canadian films of all time, just because there's nothing else particularly like it. It's
mm,
being made by a culture within Canada that we don't see this like uh, often get to see this like uh, kind of like export commercial idea of what a movie has to be, right? It's something that's so specific and so beautifully composed and like I also like uh, it, it's that specificity of telling a story within a community about a community, like for that community, where it's not hand-holding the audience in any way, where you're just kind of like getting immersed in this world and you just kind of go along with the story as it's told to you, as opposed to having to have all these like different aspects of its mythology and its community and all these things explained to you. And I think that it's inspirational for the way to approach something like Castration Movie, because it's like I don't need to take 20 minutes and explain what like trans like terminology is to
mm,
people. I don't need to. I can just let the audience be immersed in these worlds and not
mm,
and also there's a degree to which I think that something like Castration Movie 2 especially is like a sort of like in a way, like this sounds so pretentious, but there is like a myth making quality to it, right? It's like I'm
Mm,
conceptualizing it as this like nightmarish like trans horror movie, and it's almost
hmm
like, it's like creating a bedtime story for like the trans community that can work as this almost like mythic object that can be like it's already becoming a shared vernacular in a way among certain trans people, where I'm starting to see like the sort of like memification of it, where people are
okay.
making hot dog posting and all these like
Yeah.
sorts of things, or seeing an example of like a tweet going around about like a crazy trans housing situation, and then people just like quote tweeting it and saying castration
Castration
movie
Movie.
too. And
Yeah.
it's like that is like forming a cultural shorthand or something, right? Like that now
Mm,
that says everything, like there's so much now packed into the myth that's created by the narrative of the story, and it now
hmm
becomes something that's like bigger beyond like the actual object of art that we made as a group. And I think that that's what's like so fun about it, and factors into the approach to how we make them, where they are such collaborative movies that we're all bringing these pieces of ourselves into the work, and then it helps it become this much more universal story that people can connect with.
Oh, I love you tying that in with kind of the inspiration of the movie we're talking about, that myth building. So you as a creator, when you see, as you say, the memification of something you've made, is that does that inspire you, or is that kind of like just a side effect? It
Yeah, I
doesn't
mean, I
distract
mean
you.
it's a little harrowing because like I hope my art can, like live up to the audience that's embraced it. I mean, like I
Mm,
made these movies for myself as like a fun thing to do with my friends, and because I needed to make some art. And I never expected them to be watched by anybody. I mean, it's a pretty tough sell to look at a 4.5 hour art film, and think that people are going to be going out to a movie theater to see that. That's why we put it online, and I said, if anyone wants to see this, they'll be able to watch it the second they hear about it. And
yeah, yeah.
the thing
Mm,
was, it turned out like a pretty solid number of people wanted to watch it. I mean, like it's not a lot of people, but it's like, like 2,000 people is a hell of a lot more people than I expected to watch a
mm,
movie like this. So yeah, I think that the other side of it is like it's so interesting how cyclical these things are. Like there's a bit of an Ouroboros of culture happening where these movies are repackaging this terminology and these like community structures and stuff that I've observed and
mm,
am putting into a movie, and then that is now inspiring new terms and communication and these sorts of like things that I'm so curious to see how they evolve. And I think that in a way it is like looking towards creating a some degree of like monoculture or shared myth, like among like especially I think like white trans women who are
mm,
are most likely to really connect with this project.
mm. Yeah, well, I have loved seeing reactions of people when I say, "Oh, I'm going to be screening this movie. Let me tell you about it. It's 4.5 hours." And they're, "What?
Yeah,
I'm going
no,
to
it's
watch
it, it-
that?"
it's not very palatable.
No.
I'm surprised anyone watches it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to watch it in an environment with other people because anyone that wants to watch it really wants to watch it, you know? There's not very
Yeah.
many, you can't be passive if you're going to watch it.
No, I
Um,
mean, I think that the people who want to see it are kind of locked in. I mean, when we do screenings, a lot of the time, like a third of the audience are people who've already seen it, and
yeah,
the rest of the audience are their friends who've been dragged along or told that by other friends that they have to watch it. Like it very much
yeah.
so is a word of mouth cult film in a way that you just don't see a lot of nowadays. And I think that it's really cool to see something that feels so online, and in terms of
Mm,
its like what I imagine its exhibition to be, kind of breaking out into the real world where people want to come and like laugh and cringe at this stuff together.
yeah. It's the Trans Terrifier 2 or Trans Hundreds of Beavers, whichever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like either of those two films very much, but I'll give you the point.
No,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Um,
um,
yeah. When talking about, like you say, the audience mostly is going to be white trans women, or at least people relating to the experience of the movie. With you, you've worked in film for a long time, and your project that it seems so far it's the thing that's gotten the biggest reception that you've worked on.
Yeah.
It being a movie that is explicitly about being trans, explicitly about the trans experience. What's your relation to that? Are you eager to get away from like, oh, I can do other things as well, or are you happy to finally give
I'll
that voice?
do I'll do anything. I just like movies. I like to fancy myself a good storyteller and a good film director. So I'm really like, I don't know. I'm so happy just as long as I get to keep working in this medium that I love so much. And one of the next projects I have on my slate as a director is uh a adaptation of the novel Little Fish by Casey Platt,
Hmm.
which is like another trans sex worker story that's like incredibly beautiful. It's about a trans woman in Winnipeg, back to crime wave territory,
Yeah.
in Winnipeg, who kind of discovers this revelation about her long deceased grandfather that kind of puts her on this like journey of self discovery, and it's like a very powerful movie about the intersection of queerness and faith in a way that I find
Mhm.
like really powerful and definitely fits into like it's a different movie than Castration Movie, which like I think Castration Movie is pretty clear there's no God here when you're watching these films. But like like exploring something that's like that intersection of like faith and spirituality with queerness like really interests me on a storytelling level and on a
Yeah.
as a director to work with actors on that. And then, I would also love to do like a studio horror movie. I would direct like a Hallmark movie. Like, I don't care. I just like directing movies. And I have the belief that like, no matter the story I'm given, I think that I have a perspective that allows me to elevate any subject matter as an artist. And I would have a really fun time doing anything as long as it's like within that that world of film directing. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my goal. My like dream like studio movie would be to like do a legacy sequel to Tremors, the Kevin
Oh,
Bacon
beautiful.
film.
I just
uh
watched it for the first time
oh,
recently. Yeah.
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
That would be a great one. I love that movie. I would love to reboot that movie. So like that's like that's the sort of like place that like I just love the medium of film, and I want to be able to work at like any level. And I love directors like Steven Soderbergh or like more recently like Ben Wheatley, where you can kind of just be jumping between all these different levels of film and chasing whatever's exciting you in the moment. And I
Yeah.
think that that's like who I am, where it's just like I get bored of cinema really easily, so I just want to keep like pushing in different directions and doing things that always feel very like new and contemporary and have, with Castration Movie, it proved that there's like I wanted to make a movie that was like very by us, for us, and about us in terms of like trans women and it was or white trans women, I guess specifically. And it was, it found its audience in a way that was really special. So I yeah, would love to just like keep expanding outside of that. Like there's so many amazing people I've had the chance to collaborate with over the last little while, and there's like projects I'm working on that fall so far outside of that space. Like projects that are still trans but have like completely different trans characters, or projects that have no trans characters, like just covering this whole like like I just love people, so just any movie that's about people in this world or off this world, I don't give a shit. I just want to be doing like I just like telling human stories and
Yeah.
finding whatever uh aspect of it makes it like a good movie more than anything.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm love everything you make. I'm eager to see more of those projects. But in the midst of this big castration movie, I'm so excited to be sharing it with more people. There's so many things. Again, we could talk for hours, and I don't want to take too much time. But I want to talk about a few other inspirations I know that you're coming from and talk about the idea of being a provocative figure, not just as a director, but the provocative figureheads that you look up to, such as Von Trier, Vincent Gallo, who are very prevalent on the watch list. Someone like Lena Dunham with a, I believe I've heard you say, not to misquote you, hopefully not, that you want to get canceled as badly canceled as Lena Dunham did in the late 2010s.
God, what did I don't even remember when I said that, but that's really funny.
You say funny things, believe me.
Um, yeah, I mean, like for me, I think going through each of those filmmakers, I think that Lars von Trier is one of the most humanist directors of the contemporary era. Like he reminds me of someone like uh, uh, I guess like uh, Robert Bresson or like Shohei Imamura or
Mhm.
you know like these directors who are like such humanist filmmakers where like there's so much emotion they get off of an actor's face and
Yeah.
putting them in situations that like you can feel like such a deep empathy towards the characters.
Mm.
And so for me that's like Von Trier, like the reason his movies can work as being so punishing and provocative is because you know him as a filmmaker is feeling every ounce of pain alongside those characters as a director. And you know, I think to me that's the feeling I try to bring into it, where like, you know, when you have a character like Circle who's going through so much torture, it's like I want to bring that level of empathy into my directing and really like relish in those emotions and understand why we're doing what we're doing. Um, and then I mean, Vincent Gallo, I think, just has such an amazing, like, brutal honesty in his formalism and
Mhm.
his presentation. Like, there's some images in Buffalo 66 that are so, like, transcendent and sublime.
Mhm.
Especially that, like, bowling alley sequence, which, like, we have our own bowling alley sequence coming up later in Castration
Oh, I
Movie.
can't wait. Yeah.
I do feel like bowling is a very important spiritual space within the grounds of cinema. Like so many movies have like a great moment in a bowling alley.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
but
Out of the Blue is one of my favorites, and the bowling alley scene
yep.
in it is horrifying. I love it.
And also like, you know, my film mentor was the guy Ryan Nicholson who made the bowling alley slasher movie Gutter
Yes, of
Balls.
course.
So,
Mhm.
you know, it's all connected. I think there's a universal symbol of the bowling alley, especially in American cinema, or
Mm.
North American cinema.
Mm.
But then like saying like the Brown Bunny, I just love the rawness of it. It's like he's casting himself and his like girlfriend at the time and Chloe Sevigny and like they're performing like stuff that's like very raw and emotional and you know like also sexual, and I think that that's like factors into the way I try to cast and like bring these people from my real life into playing these roles, and we're kind of also working through real emotions on screen a lot of the time.
Yeah.
um and then for Lena Dunham, I think that she's similar in how naked and self-reflexive her art is an inspiration to me as well. Like I think that what's so great about Lena is she has like a sense of humor about herself that she brings into her work, and it's so revealing and unself-conscious, and
Mm.
like the way in which she's like uses her body is like a tool in that expression, like acting in all of her own work. It's like, of course, I, as someone who is also performing in my films, am like
Mm.
to want to take that rawness and vulnerability, and also like, you know, her work feels so lived in and real in the way she writes characters, and like we definitely were trying to have that level of like rapport between our cast where it feels like when we get into these rooms with people that these people have been existing long before the camera shows up, you know, and I think that
Yeah.
that's like very important to me as a filmmaker. So like yeah, all very big inspirations in their own ways, and specifically like as artists, right? Like I think that, you know, it's very facetious to make the joke about wanting to get as canceled as Lena Dunham. And I mean, obviously, the thing I think all three of those filmmakers have the most in common is the way in which they're public personas were so compromised by the degree of vulnerability that they expressed in their art
Oh,
and the
yeah,
conflation between
completely.
their art and themselves and how in for some of those filmmakers it drove them pretty crazy in a
Yeah.
lot of ways and people
Hmm.
maybe turned on them as they maybe revealed too much of themselves, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's like a really important place to be as an artist is like not always sheltering the like you're like something that feels true to you from like your audience. Like these are not filmmakers who are trying to be liked, like
Yeah.
and I definitely I think that's the thing I struggle with most is like I want to be liked as a filmmaker. I want my work to connect with
Mm-hmm.
people. But, I never want that to get in the way with the swings I'm taking artistically or the
Yeah.
subject matter I want to cover. And a movie like Castration Movie 2 is, like in hindsight, it's such a fuck you to everyone who likes the first movie in a way.
Yeah,
And
that yep.
but to me it was just I wanted to keep pushing myself and staying interested in this project. So,
Mm-hmm.
we had already shot a whole bunch of what's now part three, and it just felt so similar to what part one was,
Yeah.
that I was like, fuck, this stuff is like part three that we have finished so far is I think the strongest portion of the entire film as it
Mm-hmm.
stands,
Mm-hmm.
but I wanted to challenge myself to go a little outside of this box that I was succeeding in and people were really liking
Yeah.
and go shoot this movie about a basement cult in Bushwick and
Yeah.
have some really like really like hard politics to like dig into and discuss and really challenge people in a way that like it is an ideological provocation, but I think the movie's coming from it in a really good place, but it's definitely wanting to challenge the audience and talk about it after, and I think that that's the best thing a movie can do in such a heightened political and cultural environment as we are in right
Yeah.
now with the culmination of Trump 2.0 driving everyone more polarized than ever. It's like, let's make it, I wanted to make a movie that like puts all of these feelings into this like really intense focus and but still keep that like really empathetic lens on it, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the bringing up of bad politics and like pushing those boundaries and talking about Vincent Gallo, it leads me into something I would love to talk with you more about, and particularly a movie I watched on your recommendation from the list. And to quote the movie, if you want to talk a little bit more about your own provocative side, to quote Free Ray 2, how does a girl get into barfing? There's
uh
quite a bit of vomit stuff, both in one and two.
it started as a joke on my podcast, which was me and Aoife Clements have a podcast together called Trans Panic, where
Oh, yes.
the
I love it.
basis of it was Aoife hadn't really seen a lot of these like staple like underground horror movies from like my
Yeah.
world. So
Mhm.
I was like, hey, I'm gonna like stick these on you and then we can talk about them. And we're both like very like philosophy pilled, so it was like fun to unpack these movies that often people wouldn't give a second thought to above the provocation. So it was like, oh, well, let's talk about like why these things might be transgressive through our sort of
Yeah.
perspective, right? And like what
Yeah.
makes them actually like interesting as like political or ideological or even just aesthetic, artistic objects. And we were covering I believe Regurgitated Sacrifice, which is a film
Mhm.
by the a monster of a film human being Lucifer Valentine.
Uh-huh.
And what was interesting to me about it was we were like watching it and the throwing up was like viscerally affecting me. Like I threw up while watching the movie. Not
Yeah.
from the puking, but there's a scene where someone's drinking pee in the movie. And I was like, oh my God, I can't. And I vomited. And the uh it turned into a joke while we were on the podcast. I was talking about the fact that I could throw up on demand. And then it was like, well, fuck, like that's production value right there. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
like, okay, well, like let's make I decided to make that like a quirk for Michaela's character is that when she's stressed, she throws up. So it was
Mhm.
like, okay, well, let's like put that in. Because it's also like a very human thing. I think a lot of people probably have like visceral responses like that emotionally. I was like, let's put that quality in there for that character, and it I don't think of it as like being that provocative. We're not like showing like super intense close-ups of puke or anything, but I think that on a character level, it made sense to me to put that
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah, totally. For me, it's like real intense exposure therapy going on sometimes. When part two, when like the build up, the hamburgers, I was like, I fucking know what's gonna happen. I know what's gonna happen. I'm so pissed that I have to watch this.
Well, the
And
funniest thing is when we screen, one of the times we screened it, people were having a more, yeah, the first time we screened part two, people were having a more grossed out visceral reaction to Lex eating those like
then the
super
eating,
wet
then the
burgers than the
yeah,
actual throwing up after, which
which
she never actually threw up. So
yeah, yeah. Which learning from Lex, that was an idea she brought kind of
yeah.
the night
No,
of.
she felt like she was gonna throw up.
Hmm.
So she was like so it was kind of like one of those unspoken things. She was like, dude, start filming me. And we were kind of joking like, oh, this would be good like BTS. But then the second we started rolling on it, like it just looked beautiful and stuff. And then
Oh no, it's the movie, yeah.
Me and Ivy just all intuitively understood. Like I could feel behind me, Ivy and Liz, who was with us, like were migrating to the side so they'd be out of shot. And then all of a sudden, like Lex locks in and then just goes like, "Hey Keller, I'm okay." And we're now in a scene. And I think that that's the
Yeah,
thing that's so great about the collaborative nature is like we get so invested into understanding these characters and understanding the environments we exist in that then when we have a moment like that of serendipity where it just like a scene just comes out of nowhere. Like we don't like that just it's some like artistic like beautiful like thing just pouring in through this like ethereal other place where all of a sudden we
yeah.
just all walk in and then create it and now it's real, you know, and that's what's so beautiful about this project.
Yeah, and that's such the unique thing. I talked with Eve and learned that the cat girl character, she just kind of brought like, yeah, it'll be a cat girl, and that seems so integral, like it would be in the
Oh,
script, you know?
well, and it was because like we were talking and like, you know, that was something I knew Eve would bring something in that zone. And
Yeah,
then when we
yeah.
start and so we had talked, like she was like, I'm gonna wear my collar and all this stuff, and we were like, yeah, hell yeah. And then we start rolling, and I remember thinking, oh no, this is a horrible mistake. Like the first time we
Okay,
started
yeah.
rolling on it, I was like, is this too over like is this too over the top was like my
Uh-huh.
thought. I was like, is this
You
now
have that thought sometimes?
well, yeah, of course. I mean,
Yeah,
like, because I'm still trying to create a cohesive tone and world. Like in my
yeah,
head, I know what the movies need to be and feel like.
hmm,
And at first, I was like, is this going to be too jarring of an element? Is this too silly? And I killed that voice in my head because I trusted Eve so intensely, and I trusted everyone else in that cast. And I knew that we would make it real somehow through all of our combined effort. And like in hindsight, I remember we got back. I went back because we shot all the cult stuff in 2 days. I remember I got back that first night. I was looking through footage, and the magic just jumped off the screen. Like it was like
hmm,
holy shit. Like I was so happy that I had that forethought to know that I had to just trust all these amazing people who are so talented that I'm collaborating with, and just trust their taste, trust their interests, trust their what they know needs to be there. And like yes, I do veto things once in a while. Like there's definitely ideas that I know do not are not castration movie, but that
yeah,
was one of those ones that was so on the edge and then we went for it and I'm so happy we did. I'm so happy that Eve brought that to that character. It's one of those memorable things and like you know, her in the accountability scene, like being so concrete and going, "I am literally a cat," is like one of those memorable moments of that movie, and it's
yeah.
definitely stuck out, you know.
The funniest line in the movie for me is, first of all, I participated in a school walkout for gun violence.
Which
It's
all Eve, that was all Eve.
hilarious.
Yeah, all
Yeah,
Eve.
that
Um,
yeah, that feeling of stumbling upon a scene of just a creation that is so spontaneous is huge in both parts, and it's the most you see that in other works of art, but it's so unique in Castration Movie.
Yeah.
It's like so it's so
Well, it's
prescient,
like
you know?
building a diorama or something, you know? It's like I'm
Mm,
taking all these elements that I know if I put them in a specific order and put all these specific personalities and whatever in here, we're gonna get magic. So it's like, you know, we're building the environments, we're building the sets, we're choosing these locations like very specifically, and then I'm filling the dollhouse with this actor, and we've done prep work so these actors know exactly who they are. And then I am telling each person in the scene exactly as much information as they need to know to get the scene from point A to point B to point C. And
hmm.
then we get to yell action, and then we just exist in that moment for 5 to 20 minutes, and then we go on to the
Yeah,
next scene. We only do it
yeah.
once. We just capture that magic, and it is really in a way it's like also lining up dominoes or something. It's like you know what the next one is going to be, but there's yeah, and dominoes aren't a good example. There's something too though that's a magic where you don't always know what direction they're going to fall, you know, but you know that they're going to hit we're going to hit the ending we're intending on eventually. But you know, people that I'm working with are improvising these genius lines or taking these asides that I'm not really expecting on that journey
Hmm.
sometimes. But we always pursue it because like these actors, like, you know, everyone I'm working with is so prepped where they know these characters they're playing so well that I just know we're going to make those moments real. And
Mm.
I think it's like, yeah, there is something about it that always delivers for me where every time I finish a scene, I just get a big smile on my face being like, holy shit, you know, like we
Yeah.
just did that. And and it's fun like a lot of times too like the act like you know one of the most fun rushes I get is when something really spectacular happens and I get a smile on my face and I look around and other like actors or a producer in the room or someone else who's helping out or whatever is like going like holy shit like we all can't believe how good it went in a way like we were like you know like we were like I can't believe that just happened because it's like wow the amount of things that had to just perfectly slide into place for us to nail it in that way. I think that the torture scene with Lex, that first big one that ends
Yeah.
with Jamila playing that song on the bass guitar, is like
Oh, so
that
good.
was like so much prep for us to get there, but everyone had such a specific idea of what they needed to do, and it was just like a 0.001% chance that every single element would go off
Hmm.
perfectly for
Hmm.
everything to play off of each other in the way it needed to. And yeah, no, the second we watched, I must have watched that footage back like 40 times throughout the week after we shot it. Like I just had it up on my phone, just playing it over and over, showing everyone I knew, just because I was so like awestruck that we had pulled that off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a feeling of community filmmaking that there's hard to find anything similar to it. But one thing that is definitely present in kind of a comparison, and you recorded a whole podcast about this, so we don't have to do a whole lot of discussion on this, but I did watch To Boldly Flee for the first time to in
Perfect.
preparation for screening Castration Movie. And I love the way that the work you're doing is it is really similar where it's a community, it's all these creatives who have their own world and they're not being referenced explicitly in Castration Movie, but most people watching will be like, "Oh, you know, hey, that's a Lex Walton song that's being played, you know, in the background. That's Ada Rook song. Oh, you know, I know that artist. I know what they've done, and they're all collaborating and presenting
Yeah.
themselves in that way."
Well, it is that thing of like it opens up what I would have hoped internet art would be, right? Like the thing is that every single great artistic movement comes from the proximity of people who are building a scene and lifting each other up. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, you see it with the Dreamlanders, you know, with John Waters, or you see that with like Andy Warhol's Factory, or like
Mm-hmm.
all of these different like conceptions, like the mumblecore movement that happened
Mm-hmm.
in New York in like the late 2000s. It's like, you know, it's such an amazing framework where great art can come out of that collaboration between great creatives. And I think that because of the internet, it's like, you know, we're not bound by geography. Like an online space is its own thing that we can be building art through. And I
Yeah.
think that especially like as it comes to like trans culture, it almost works best coming out of online framework or an online space, like an online community. And so me getting to do this project and basically just like, hit up over DMs all these amazing people and say, "Hey, you want to, throw a song in the mix here? Do you want to come act in this?" Like, is like really special. And I think that that's like, it feels like we've really built a community around Castration Movie where now it's like so funny because all these people who are involved in it are like obviously some of the most talented people working in the arts right now, and we're
Yeah.
getting to, I think that we're seeing so many people who are tangentially or actively involved in this that are like finally getting their dues in a big way, and it just makes me so fucking happy to have like, even played a small part in championing the art of anyone who I've had the chance to work with on this.
Yeah. I guess a kind of final thing to wrap up and get some of your thoughts with the rollout of you did a tour, you did some live Q&As of
Yeah.
part two. You also have just kind of been engaging with how it's being received. And you talked about the memification you saw. What is the process like when looking forward to part three and a part four with audience reactions? Are you taking note what happens and then like pushing things certain ways?
No, I think it should be obvious from the part one to part two that I just don't really care too much.
You're
I
sticking with the idea, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I had this like really planned out. I think that the thing that's more inspirational in terms of how things change, it has nothing really to do with the audience. It has to do with like, if I'm shooting a scene with a character and that character just like needs more. Like if we look at someone who only was like a one-off scene and it's just like fuck, they have a magnetism where I need to come back and check in on what's happening with them in the next chapter or something. I think that that's really important. I mean, to be honest, a lot of the uh anything that really changes in the project is more inspired by the financial limitations of making
Mm,
this small,
yeah,
or people's schedules. If someone moves away, I can't work with them anymore. Like it's like little things where it's a lot more like on a practical level of like the actual real world implications of making a movie and like having to have people together acting and doing all these things and having to, like try to pay everyone who works on these and everything. So it's like,
mhm.
if we run out of money, like we're currently in a position where like I just had a grant I was kind of counting on, ended up not going all the way through. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
so now I'm like, okay, well, how do we finance the next round of shooting or whatever? Like
Yeah,
it's a lot
yeah.
of creative problem solving, but like, when there's no money, we're not shooting. So it's like
Mhm.
trying to, whether that's like trying to get more eyes on the project where people are buying it for pay what you want online or doing another crowdfunding campaign or whatever it ends up being. Those are the things that more so dictate changes where it's like, we're planning on four movies. If the, financing runs out, we'll be figuring out a way to wrap it up in three or whatever. Like, I definitely have a grand vision of how I would love for all of this to go and get tied up. I
Mhm.
think that we've got different degrees of like, there's the like super S tier version of like where the rest of like Castration movie goes, which is if
Yeah.
we had all the resources we need to make it happen. And then there's like
Mm.
the more like restrained, small scale, we're out of money, and I'm like, filming post-it notes on the wall to tie everything up version of it, like
Yeah, yeah.
it's there's a lot of it really is just going to depend on what resources we have to do it. But no, I
Mhm.
don't really look at the audience in terms of how to uh how to change the story or anything. And honestly, I'm happy I don't, because otherwise I feel like the audience would think I actively d dislike them or despise them in some way, which couldn't be further from the truth. I love the audience for these movies. I'm so grateful to them. But like, it's so funny. Like me and Aoife have talked numerous times about certain plot beats and stuff that have been like set in stone since the start of this project back in 2022.
Yeah.
And I go like, oh, is this like too mean to like do something like this? Like,
Mhm.
and he was like, no, we got to commit. Like, you have to stay committed to the project. You can't be bending to, like to what the audience is liking. So I do
Yeah,
try to,
yeah.
I do make sure I'm surrounded by people who are equally focused on making sure that we're making this art as like real and close to like our original intent as possible.
Yeah, of course. And I worded the question poorly because I wouldn't didn't mean to imply you would pander to an audience in any way. But I
Oh no,
love the way,
no.
yeah, I love the way that seeing how the project has the rollout of it has changed in so many ways of you initially planned on like a short like 90-minute movie, and then there's discussion. It's like, oh, it's 6.5 hours, it might be split into parts. And then part two, what it seemed was teasing for part two is now actually stuff that's going to be in part three. I remember starting
Yeah.
part two and be like, wasn't there going to be like that, all these other things? But and I love that. And it's great that you're having opportunities to work with people that you may not have originally if you did just kind of do a quicker or shorter version and
Yeah.
making it a totally different vision.
Well, and I think the thing is that it wouldn't have been this movie. I think that the
Yeah.
when I joke about the 90-minute movie thing, it's like that idea was gone within a month of starting
Yeah.
just
Hmm.
because the story started flowing so much, especially like with the conception of Castration Movie as like a longer project just suddenly turned into us all riffing on, well, then this should happen and this should happen. And I started really broadening the scope of the project too. So it has, yeah, I think that 90-minute conception of it hasn't really existed since January of 2023 when we kind of locked in on realizing what the project was.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, I've really enjoyed talking with you. Again, I don't want to keep this over too longer than an hour. I know there's so many things I've loved about diving into, not just what you've done with Castration Movie or your other work. I love the podcast with Aoife. I love the things I've learned from the blog that you've kept about the production of Castration Movie, but also just like insight into what it is like being an independent filmmaker. This has been really inspirational and great for me to see. And going through recommendations you have on Letterboxd and through the podcast you do with Aoife has been so great. Just introducing me to worlds of cinema I didn't even know existed. I would love to talk with you more about like I would love to talk about Louise Brooks with you. Love to
Ah,
talk about
yeah.
more like Vincent Gallo with you and just like a whole crime wave hour-long discussion because I adore that film. I would love to hear more of your experience. Um, with what that movie means to you. But yeah, I'm glad we had this discussion talking
Yeah.
about specifically Castration Movie. But yeah, I'm excited to show the work, and I definitely will reach out to you and let you know how the screenings go. And I'll be finishing a zine that'll include some interviews and a couple essays written by me and maybe some other people. And I'd be happy to send you a copy if you want
I
to.
would love that. That'd be
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, that would be great. I can send a digital one, or when I print it, I'll send you a physical one if you send I'll pay for shipping. I could
Oh
do
yeah,
all
you
that.
just let me know. I mean, it's hard going between Canada and the US now. I mean, I think
Yeah, fucking sucks. Yeah.
well, I think paper goods are technically fine, but
Yeah.
still, it's so stressful.
There's both the Justin DeClue's Blu-ray line I love buying stuff from, and if you know the filmmaker Steven Broomer and Black Zero,
Yeah.
that Blu-ray company, I buy like almost all their stuff, and now it's like, oh well, it really
Yeah. No, and it
it's
goes
sucks
both
having to do
ways
that.
now. It's like I can't afford a fucking movie like
Yeah. No. It's frustrating. And that's what part two is about, how America sucks. Uh,
I mean, it is I it is something. I mean, but I'm an eternal optimist. I really
mm,
I'm not a cynical person. I do think that there is goodness in this world, so I think that things will swing back eventually. We just
yeah,
gotta fight for
yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for having this discussion. I've loved your insight into how some of these inspirations have affected your work. And yeah, it's given me even more excitement to watch Castration Movie with a group of people and see what the reactions will be
I
like.
can't wait. Please let me know how that all goes.
I will. Okay.